Okay, hi everybody. I'm Dirk Löwenberg. I'm GVL's director for the label or producer side. And I'm here today with my colleague Max, who will join me later, and also Luca from Universal. Maybe as a background, we've been working with DDEX for quite some time now. We started implementing RDR back with version 1.2, I think, and for a couple of years are now using 1.4. 2 years ago, GVL also onboarded to RDX as a recipient of data, and very recently we are also are sending data to RDX, acting as a source, so creating our own DDEX radar files for data exchange. We heard a lot of or about the benefits of RCC, standardization being top on the list. Apart from that, we actually see two more advantages, and that is the ability to automatically provide this report, because we already have like channels to those who deliver us with DDEX files directly. So we can create the RCC file automatically and provide it there to get picked up, and can do the same with a response coming from a rights holder. So that's something we weren't able so far. We have a conflict export like on demand, which you can download, but apart from that, we think that's another advantage of RCC. Basically, if I go on now, we don't really need the slides anymore, but no problem. Yeah, as I said, well, another background, I think we've been at an advantage for implementing RCC because GVL systems provide a nearly real-time conflict detection. So every registration at GVL, be it a recording, a sound recording, or music video clip, is matched to our whole database, and a conflict detection is taking place, providing the rights holder with possible conflicts. What we then also have is a very, very detailed conflict export that gives you nearly all the information already or implemented in RCC. There are some differences, some changes, but nevertheless, that made it quite easy for us, and we were able to do it quite quickly. And we'll actually have this live next week. So from next week onwards, you, all our members or the societies we work together with can download the RCC export.
Yes, so thanks, Dirk. So again, I think just maybe, again, just to take a step back and just to understand some of the rationale behind why we wanted to build out this message. There's a recurring theme with everything that we've talked about today in terms of standardizing areas where we used to receive multiple formats into one format just to make ingestion, interpretation of that data much more efficient. And conflicts all seemed like one of those areas that was ripe for standardization. We at Universal, and actually just all rights holders, that if a conflict happens at GVL, it's quite probable that that same conflict is going to be in the UK at PPL or in Australia, et cetera, I mean, if we've communicated our rights and somebody else has also communicated their rights and they overlap, typically they're going to overlap in multiple territories. And so what was happening is that we were just working in silos. So our team in Germany would resolve that conflict. They would get in touch with the rep owner, in touch with the business affairs. We would ascertain our rights position and then either withdraw or maintain. And then a couple of weeks later, our team in Australia would do the same thing, and they'd go and, again, go back to the same business affairs at the label, ask them the same question, and then they'd update the status in their local MLC as well. So it was hugely inefficient. It was taking up a lot of time within our local business affairs teams being asked the same question over and over again. So the idea was then to centralize all these conflicts into one central database, so that we could see very quickly that this one conflict is occurring across multiple territories. And that way, if we resolve it once, we just have one question to business affairs, we clarify our rights position one way or the other, and then we can communicate that back to all the different parties that we are in, all different MLCs where we're in conflict. So it just kind of speeds up that process and makes it far more efficient. Like I said, we ingest all this data into a central database. So that means that having a standard format makes it much easier for us, so that we're not having to create different mappings for different types of conflict files. So that was kind of the reasoning behind why we wanted to create the standard. It just saves everyone a bunch of time. It just makes the whole system more efficient, and ultimately it just means monies flow through to our labels and our artists far more quickly. So that was our kind of perspective. That's why we were behind this new standard.
Thanks, Luca. As Dirk mentioned, we already implemented the standard. It's going to go live next week. And my slides are about telling you the challenges we experienced implementing. I think we just skipped the slides. The first slides have been about how easy it is to implement RCC. So the second two slides are just about it's really easy, just do it. It's straightforward. Don't be scared. And so we skipped that part because it's really easy, just do it. And the two challenges we had were monetary value, because that's actually, so there you go. We had the benefits, we had that what we're coming, that's the conflict export, that was Luca. That's how easy it is to implement it. There's a header and a footer because it's DDEX, of course. Vanessa already told you what's within the header and footer. Header is like who made your export and who's receiving it. And the footer is like how many conflicts are there. And then you have the information from the sender, which is the MLC, which supports the recording and the conflict information and the value. That's pretty much it. And everything else is like rights information and contact information from the receiver of this standard and the conflicting parties, which can be a lot or just one. Let's see. And that's it. All done. Yeah, easy. That's our technical implementation process. Because it's like a tech meeting, I thought I'd try something techy, but maybe it's too deep and we make it more easy. Because we trigger it from the front end, from label GBL, we have like a query event, which is our technique behind Elasticsearch. So we query from our front end the relevant data and take a snapshot in time from this 26 million records we have in this Elasticsearch. With the relevant data, which is mostly about like 1,000 or 10,000 conflicting datas, then we take the snapshot, slice it into small parts to process it parallel, enhance performance. We enrich this data with CRM data, for example, like CRM, like contact, email, and stuff like that, and do the formatting. And then we piece it all together into the CSV file. Error handling and user feedback, yeah, is how all our export works. All our exports at the portal work, and quite easy actually for implementing as well. So it's easy, do it. Yeah, if you have questions on this, don't hesitate to ask us. We are happy to give feedback. And now the challenges. Yeah, Dirk helps me with that one. The first one I find quite interesting. So held monetary value is quite difficult for us to provide in real time. And so we are going with the weight. And the weight can be determined between 0 and 100, which brings us to the challenge because we've been discussing 3 different scenarios. The first one would be, so within the weight, we would like to put our minutes that we
that's what we're doing now. We communicate a score per conflict, and that is based on the unweighted allocated minutes to the track and conflict. And that can go way over 100. And with very popular tracks, it can reach 100,000 minutes even. And that's why 0 to 100 rather is a restriction. But Max came up with some ideas.
Yeah, the first what you're doing at the moment is we just divide it by 1,000. So if it's 1 for 100, we just write in 1. If it's like 1,000, it's still 1. If it's 10,000, it's 10. That has its limits and disadvantages and advantages. For universal, for example, that's quite all right, I think. But if you like a smaller label, you want to divide, okay, is it like 50 minutes or is it 100 minutes? You maybe want to see the difference. And so we came up with this logarithmical curve up here. So it flattens the higher it gets. And if you like, at the end of the scale, 1 point is much more than it is at the beginning of the scale. There was one thing we might implement. The other idea was to make it different for every rights holder. So if Universal has a score between 500,000 and 1, then we say, all right, 500,000 is 100. And maybe for the next rights holder, the maximum is 100, so 100 is 100. But we experienced from our conflict export that they're talking to each other. And of course, they want to stop the conflict. And they say, oh, the conflict is 100. And they say, oh, no, my conflict is just 1.
Yep. So that's, yeah, that was our experience in the last couple of years. So that's maybe a bit tricky. For the time being, we just did what Max said, divided by 1,000 and start with that.
So we actually want to go with a discussion on this one. There any input from you guys or maybe from one's
I mean, another question to DDEX would be, do we need this limit 100? Can we just leave it 0 to infinity? Because then we could just use our score.
Let's have a clear opinion. No, I think this is really valuable input. Things that transpire just once you implement the message. I presume every MLC will have a different way of calculating their weight. Changing cardinality is relatively easy, but would probably have to happen in the next version. Well, the value, yes, sorry.
It's about the value.
Yes.
That's not, there's no technical restriction because there's no XP also that enforces it, but that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in principle, you could go beyond.
And all right. Okay.
So if there's no technical, there is like one in the document because it says it has to be a number between 0 and 100. And so we say, all right, if it's in the DDEX document, we're not going to exceed 100, but if we can.
Can I add just, with the weight, it does have to have an upper limit or else that number doesn't mean anything. Because you could say, if you don't have an upper limit and you say the score is 6,000 without any reference to what that is, it doesn't mean anything. So I remember the reason for the weight, it's to allow the rights holders to prioritize the conflicts that they should be working on. If we're getting a list of 1,000 conflicts, not every conflict is equal. And so if something's got a weight of 100, even if it's our 100 is different to Beggar's 100, we know that's our number one conflict that we need to resolve. So I think that's why we need to, I personally am comfortable with different rights holders getting the weighting meaning something slightly different in terms of the value, but it's the priority. I think that's important so that we address the valuable conflicts.
Yeah, from experience, Luca, I can tell you, like, if you have conflicts with small indies, and for you, this conflict has a weight of 5, but for the indie, it has 100. It could lead to sort of discussions and irritation.
But if the indie does have the rights and they are the ones that want to maintain and we should withdraw, then there's no reason if they approach us why we would not withdraw just because it's got a small weighting. It's just for them, if it's a priority and they know they want to maintain it, then it's on them to action it. And we're not going to ignore it just because it hasn't a high weighting.
Okay.
If it was the other way around.
Yeah, I don't mean you're not ignoring it, but you give it a lower priority. So
we would give it a lower priority in terms of us taking action on it. So let's say we were the rights holder and actually we should be claiming it and the Indy should be withdrawing, it might take us longer to get round to that one to fix it than if it was the other way around. So that's all. But I think if the Indy was the correct rights holder, and for them that was high priority, then and they approach us and say, "Can you withdraw?" Because we would action that. Yes.
Okay.
So as I understand you right, you're for like make the priority different per rights holder depending on the highest value and the lowest one. Okay.
So yes, I think that field needed to mean something for everyone. And we knew that every music licensing company would or carries in their own database a different way of calculating the weight. But in order to communicate the weight, I think Luca's description is correct. That was the conclusion of the working group.
Okay.
We have a question from online from Alexis Chubb. I noticed the value was required, but what if it is not available? The value?
It's not mandatory.
So if it's not the good thing about the weight is that you can just set a number between 0 and 100. It doesn't have to have a realistic value to it. So maybe there was a misunderstanding. If you want to put in the held monetary value, then it should be euros or British pound. And then if it's not available, that's actually what the field weight is for. If you don't have the monetary value, you can use the field weight. And as we just discussing, you can set it.
Yeah, just to add to what Max is saying, it's, currently with config files, we don't always get the monetary value with the files that we receive today from various societies. Some of them just don't provide it. Some of them aren't able to. So where it is available and it can be populated, great. Where it isn't, it's not a mandatory field. It's just there. If you have that data, then put it in. If you don't, we can rely on the weighting then if we need to prioritize.
So Rob from Vegas, I would like to stress that although RDR RCC and RDR-N can work in parallel, there's actually only one way to communicate. If you use them in parallel, there's only one way to communicate back to the MLC, that is through RDR-N, because you cannot say in a spreadsheet, I revoke or I don't have the rights anymore, and then not maintain it in your database, because next time it gets updated, it will reappear as a conflict again. So if you want to revoke, you have to revoke through your own database and not through this spreadsheet.
Yeah, well, depends. I mean, the idea of the flat file messaging, first of all, is to enable rights holders and MLCs who are not yet working with DDEX. So, and if you do both, your database should be the same source, the one source for everything, I think. And if you respond by RC sum, you don't have the ability to say maintain or pending.
Yeah, no, yeah, I understand, and I also think if you use RDR-N, it should not be necessary to say pending or maintain, because pending within RDR-N is the same as maintain, and maintain until otherwise decided, and maintain is just not updating or revoking your claim through RDR-N. So, yeah.
But these can be conversations between sender and recipient. The messages allow you to do both. It allows you to do just one. And I think to your point, Rob, what the message cannot do is automatically change the information in your database. If you've sent something erroneously and want to revoke it, RCC only allows you to communicate that, but you need to go into your database and then manually take back and change the information. It's not an automatic process.
Rob is actually jumping to the next point already. Action required. But there any questions or input on the value? If not, we'll jump to the next one. Yeah, like Rob or like Vanessa mentioned before, another field we had trouble with is the one action required. It's actually just true or false.
Sorry, Max, I just thought of, based on value and weight, if value or weight is 0, assuming that 0 means there is no value to it, should it pop up as a conflict? Just as an open question to the group.
Yeah.
It probably depends on how you implement that weighting, right? 0 might mean that there is value, but it's at the very, very long tail of things. So it doesn't necessarily mean that there's no value. It's just right at the bottom of your ranking or sorting.
And there's no value now. There could be next year. You know, it's and still 2 parties claim the same recordings, if there's value or not, but they're very low priority. That's right.
You might want to solve it before. You might want, sorry, this is Luis from PS. You might want to solve that before it accrues play or value.
Yeah, but you know, talking with priorities, if there's no value, it's not worth putting time into that. So my suggestion was, indeed, if it gets value in future, then it pops up as a conflict, but only if there's value attached to it. And you're right, Rod. It may be close to nothing, fine, but if it's nothing, maybe we should set that in the standard. If it's 0, there is actually no value. So it's 1 to 100 with 0 is no value, possibly. Just a suggestion.
That's how we implement it. So 0 is, there is no value. But we are still populating conflicts with 0.
Hi, Paul from PS. Just a quick question. Obviously, on the weight, if the weight obviously is 0, there's a bottom one rights holder, it's over 100%. Obviously, in 6 months' time, that value may jump radically. Is there any sort of further update, sort of with a conflict in such a situation where the value has sort of taken off on a sink or whatever it may be? Or does it just remain as a 0 or a 1?
You're jumping to the next slide. We can just jump across.
Okay.
The last question with the trigger. We had that one as well. So the actual question from our side was, when do we trigger a new RCC file? If the value changes, could be one trigger. If the conflict changes, could be one trigger. What we're talking to Luca from Universal was we trigger it every month. At the moment, you can just trigger it yourself on the portal. So you press a button and you get a new one. But if we do in the SFTP choreography, the question remains, what's the trigger for generating a new RCC file?
Again, from what I'm hearing, again, it comes back also to if there are wrong ISRCs in there, wouldn't that be a conflict? Wouldn't that cause some conflict? I mean, I'm just asking, but then check this out. The last 3-4 years, we sent out a letter to all the distribution companies that US and QMs has been discontinued. We, like certain data has a lot of discontinued ISRC codes. So I think that's something you'll need to put a question mark next to, because there's a lot of ISRC codes that are attached to different track titles that are definitely, they're dormant. So again, you're gonna run right back into that problem if we don't put at least that fix from the RIAA from that top. to make sure that we can identify the registered, who's the registered owner of that code. Because you're gonna run into problems when it comes to the accounts department, and you're gonna run into the problems right there like we're having right now. I'm just making y'all see the ISRC is still coming up in every different part, and we are overlooking that.
Thank you for your comment. So we know as an industry that we have some gaps and overlaps and duplications of ISRCs. It's an industry-wide problem, no matter which way you want to communicate with what type of partner. This particular communication relies on the fact that you do have a proprietary ID or an ISRC, and you have been already in touch with the music licensing company, which is the collection society mandated to collect the rights for the use of a sound recording, needs to report back to the rights owner. And I think this is the communication that we're talking about, and it's specifically when a number of parties are in conflict with regards to claiming rights to that sound recording. It is not a conflict that happens that you communicate because you have two ISRCs for a sound recording. So I think that is the difference. We will not be communicating data mismatches in this particular standard. So if you have ISRC mismatches or ISRCs missing, I believe the best way is to identify who the owner of that is, go back and request the right ISRC, or to communicate that you have a mismatch and that the data is being changed at source. I know it sounds simple, and it is in practicalities. It's not simple, but most of us deal with that problem. And the only way of not repeating the same ISRC issue over and over again is to require the rights controller to change it at their end. I think that's the short answer to a very, very long-standing problem. In this particular scenario where we're communicating conflicts is really where in one territory you've got Universal, Warner, and Beggars claiming rights to that sound recording, and the total claims are more than 100%. And then those three parties need to come together in a room, or by using this standard to sort out who actually owns the rights until it's been established that the rights add up to 100%. I think that is the process we are trying to establish, an automated way of saying, okay, actually 3 people claim rights to the sound recording in France, but in fact it should only be 2. Or if it's still 3, then their rights claim needs to be reduced to 33.3% each. So I think that's a summary. ISRC issues, the industry is working on solving them. It's not part of this particular working group.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Should we maybe talk about action required shortly?
Yeah, I think we make a tick on value. What I understood is we start with it's receiving specific. So whoever receives the message, we would start to make the value precisely on their needs. And if it's 0, there is no weight. And so it's not important. If there's a veto on this, please speak now. If not, we'll do it like that. All right, PPR.
Sorry, Stuart at PPO. So just to add, I appreciate that it might have no kind of monetary value right now. Maybe it's not had any airplay right now, but there is still value in resolving rights conflicts that have been surfaced, that have been identified. There are other business processes that happen at music licensing companies that that if that conflict is resolved, that makes those processes more straightforward. And certainly from the perspective of licensing the repertoire and people that wish to use that music, knowing who specifically owns it, resolving that conflict before that's potentially been used, had airplay, there's definitely benefit to that. But I still appreciate that using a number of 0 to indicate that it's not had any airplay to date. I appreciate there's potential use case there.
Yeah, actually, Stuart, now you mentioned this at GVL as well. Even if it's a zero value conflict, we wouldn't use that track for claiming abort, because if the rights ownership is challenged in any way, no matter if there's money in Germany at GVL, because the score or the value is a German broadcast, if a record company mandates us to collect abort, we wouldn't use these tracks. They would still need to resolve it. And they could have money abort. So.
Yeah, fair point. So even the value should be reconsidered. I think good for now we start with this. Vanessa, you?
Yeah, I think this is really valuable because I can see a knowledge base article coming out of this. It might be worthwhile just describing the experience you've had and the working group coming up with a recommendation and a consensus on what the implications are and how we should be using it.
And the discussion somehow builds the bridge to the next point, the action required. Vanessa mentioned before, it's quite easy because it's false or true. So technical is really easy, but on an MLC point of view, it's not that easy. So at the moment we started with, if there's a value, a weight of 0, we say, all right, there's no action required. But after this discussion today, maybe we're changing this. And
basically, it even sounds a bit strange now that the MLC should be the side that tells the rights holder is there an action required or not.
If I remember well, the reason why this action required has been introduced is because in some cases you may already know that this claim is correct. So in that case, you don't. If you send out your conflict notification, you don't need a response from one of the parties because you know that is correct, and the other two should reply.
But then that's, I think, very MLC specific because GVL does not involve themselves into conflict resolution and we're not judging conflicts. So for us, it's really okay, as Mark said, well, if there's a value, okay, say action required, true. Apart from that, we were really wondering, okay, why are we the ones telling the rights holder if he should take action or not?
I think then if you have no internal process that has possibly, like in other MLCs, it is MLC specific and the requirements were put in because some MLCs have in their existing process a priority process. And like Stefan said, and that is correctly remembered, some MLCs knows that out. So you're sending out the same information to all conflicting parties, but you know for sure that one of those conflicting parties is already in the right with their statement. So you put the action required as false, but you still want them to have the same information that all other conflicting parties are receiving. And therefore you only set possibly the action required to true for the two other conflicting parties and hope that they're getting a message to resolve it. It may be that you only want one person to act first and that will resolve it. And if you have that internal information, you can trigger that message. If you at GVL do not get involved, you could put action required set to true to all conflicting parties, triggering them all to respond, and then you do your calculation. But I know for sure that some MLCs have a slightly different process.
So what we did is we mixed it up with the action types. It's not action type, but you can put in a reclaim, or you can say pending review. I think that's the right determination. And if you put in a reclaim, we say, right, you have done your action, not more to do for you at the moment, but it's not 100% right. So maybe we go what Vanessa would say, we just put in true every time, and it's up to you.
So that's definitely the default position.
Okay.
If you're not managing the conflicts.
you might be getting to this. So a question on, we've spoken already today about how DDEX and the kind of the data dictionary, it's the common language that kind of can sit between record company, music licensing company A, music licensing company B. And it doesn't matter if you all call a field, an attribute, 3 different things in 3 different places, you're all consistent because you map it to that common language. Many of the rights holders that I think are likely to ultimately receive these kind of notification messages, for them, they are going to be new to DDEX terminology, DDEX language and things like that. What are your thoughts on kind of how to, when you come to produce these more widely or share these notifications more widely, what are your plans for kind of, I suppose, assisting some of those producers, those rights holders, with kind of interpreting them for the first time, and kind of given that they may not, be conscious of or be aware of kind of how DDEX speaks, basically?
We decide once we have the first feedback.
Maybe to make clear, we have conflict export, which is humanable readable. Excellent. So that's straightforward. And this standard is for machines to be read. So if you like a producer who has the capability to proceed all those conflicting information from different MLCs, then I think this standard is really straightforward. But if you're like new to this world, you can go with our conflict export, which you can open in numbers or in Excel or.
Also, I have to say, these particular messages for this part of the radar standard don't really use a lot of the DDEX language. That is, it's not alien of what is required. I mean, it really just a very few fields, and you have the contact details, you've got the party, you've got the sound recording and the territory and the currency of accounting. In a way, they're quite self-explanatory, I think, what they mean. And as we said before, I think all of us here welcome people coming to us, and we can go through the 15 mandatory fields that we hope you can either populate or ingest. And I will be moving on to some of the supporting material that we provide. And I think what has just come out of this discussion is that there are possibly some other ways of documenting questions and possible solutions to preempt some of those problems by learning from the experience of those who are early implementers and testing the messages as we go along. Max has already offered to help with time to, for example, summarize the complex standard language that we use in our documentation to put a one-page summary together for that particular standard with his experience, that then can be provided and uploaded on the knowledge base article or shared more widely as a handout together with a printout of the test files, for example. We have sample files available already on the knowledge base in Excel and in TSV to TVS, whatever it is. He's just laughing. You can see that I am definitely no engineer. So you can already download those and have a look of how we've populated those files, see the content in them for both the reporting and the RCC. And for the reporting, we've got various files. One is indeed the music licensing company to record company, but for rights controller summary type, and we've got also examples for the contributor revenue. So there are quite a number of sample files online that people can look at to get an idea of what the type of data is expected to be exchanged.
That's your challenge.
Okay. Another thing we found was that, well, we know it from the RC sums from RDX or the ones we create when we get DDEX messages. Conflict information just gives you the ISRC and the conflicting party. That's it. In our experience, or what our producers and stakeholders insisted on when they wanted conflict information was, I want to see all track details the other party used this ISRC with, because what happens is rights can be, well, one party has the rights for 2 versions of a track and the other party rights for other versions. But for whatever reasons, the other party uses the original ISRC for the radio edit, but has the rights for a remix. And when you just have, okay, ISRC, and don't know what the other party claimed, it's not something that happens a lot, but it happens. And RCC doesn't provide for that information, as DDEX doesn't in general. So it's only, you have a conflict on this ISRC with this conflicting party, and then it's like date overlaps, stuff like that. And that's it. So just something that came up again on the RCC file.
To the other MLCs, do you see it relevant to distribute title, main artist, and other recording attributes beside the RSSC?
I think I can imagine that our rights holders, our members, would want to see a level of recording information, a minimum amount of information. I'm not sure within our current process. We don't provide a huge spread of recording attributes. We don't provide.
Actually, it's main artist, title supplement. That's it. That's.
I think we already kind of concatenate subtitle and title as a single string anyway. So I suppose other than a title and an artist and potentially a P date, I can't imagine that we'd need to provide much more information than that. I would hope that the ISRC is sufficient.
We started with providing the RCC export, and the second part that's going to happen beginning of next year, that is processing the response we are getting. We provided Universal with a file. We hope a lot of other parties, when we put it live, download the RCC file, and we're getting feedback, and then the response part will follow after that.
Amazing. So now we are coming to what is already available and also the sample files. So DDEX has a knowledge base. At the beginning of this morning, when Mark provided an overview of DDEX, he also showed some screenshots about what information is available publicly. We have DDEX.net, which is the website of DDEX. But then we have a dedicated knowledge base that is accessible to everyone. The slide deck will have the links and everything for that knowledge base at the beginning of that very long slide deck. But it's, I think, ddex.kb.net, if I'm not mistaken. And on there are all of our standards. You may need to navigate and do some clicking before you get to the right portion of all of the various DDEX standards that there are. The knowledge base article for RDR-R have not yet been uploaded because we've just completed a series of face-to-face meeting this week. So the RDR working group has met on Tuesday all day to actually review those knowledge base articles, to approve those knowledge base articles. And I can say they have been approved, so they will now be uploaded and made available publicly. The topics that we have addressed in this particular section were 6 various knowledge base articles for RDR-R version 1.1. So these will be available. The first article describes the concepts around 3 very often used terms: distribution, allocation, and statement. They are often used interchangeably, and they also may mean different things for different music licensing companies or rights controllers, depending of the context and territory you operate in. We didn't aim to define the terms, otherwise they would be in the standard. What we have tried to do is to provide some background and explanation of how they may be used in more generically. It's quite helpful to just have that context and the experience and input from the working group. Another knowledge base article outlines the best practice for communication between music licensing companies to keep revenue reporting for rights controllers and contributors separate. We've touched on that the new messages need to be very much separated to be either or. So that article deals with the explanation of why that is and why it is important. We have then made a point of explicitly saying how important we feel the ISRC is, despite the fact it is not a mandatory field. We have put together a knowledge base article to explain why net amount and net revenue and currency of accounting in the details message appears and may be the same in the same record. So the question was, why do we have two different fields with two different names, possibly populated with the same data? It is data that is normally in the summary report. The summary report is not always being sent, and also the way that the structure works now needs to accommodate this to be compliant with the other structure of RDR-R. So we've kept those two fields. They may or may not be different, and the knowledge base article is dealing with that conundrum. With regards to very specific audiovisual content, we have got two fields that describe the creation date and the production date. We have worked really closely with SCAPRA's Audiovisual Forum to clarify the existing definition and just provide some guidance of what we are expecting to see populated in those, because it wasn't really very clear of what are the differences between creation date and production date. More importantly, it is now very clear that production date is the core field that needs to be populated because it drives the IP. So in the next version of the standard, our DDEX definition will be enhanced based on the feedback that we have received from SCAPRA. But the feedback arrived after publication of the standard, and therefore it ended up in a knowledge base article. And the final knowledge base article that has been so far prepared is just again, reiterating that the minimum data requirements for the mandatory message revenue details is compared to the long table that is in the standard, really very much manageable. So it is just another way of communicating that despite the fact that the big document shows you a table with a long list of fields, when it comes down to it, there are not that many. And we just wanted to make that point. What I'm expecting to happen is that as more implementations are taking place, more questions will pop up, and then more knowledge base articles will be produced. And that is more or less how we operate. Therefore, I think any feedback, info@ddex.net, or using the change request page on the DDEX knowledge base article is possible. And here is the more direct answer to the question. The sample files that are already available are sample files in both Excel format and in the text separated format. The link on there brings you straight to them. These are for the RDR-R samples. Making a point that the Excel format is not a valid RDR-R standard file. It's only there to depict what the data would look like. The standard format is the second link. And we have got the same link, well, the same process for the rights claim conflict messages again, both in Excel and in the standard format. The link is here. The slide deck will be shared. You will have access to it, and you can just go to the knowledge base article or the knowledge base in order to find the articles. You will have to drill down. You go, which standard should I use? And there is an overview of all of the standards. You use the radar standard. You get all the list of all the various parts of the radar standard. You go on to the reporting, click on the link for reporting, and then you will eventually find your way to the sample files. So what the working group has decided is that they would very much focus on implementing both of those two standards. We have updated on Tuesday our implementers page that currently is out of date, available on the knowledge base. So you will find an implementers page for radar. Those list of names will be updated based on what we discussed this week. So look out for that. The way we normally proceed when we've published new standards is that we offer, DDEX offers webinars. We felt that possibly more effective ways of making implementation and adoption happen quickly, easily next year would be by offering face-to-face meeting. We would like your feedback to see how you feel you would be best supported in order to implement the standards so that we can plan accordingly. We would very much like to find the best solution that works, and will be able to reach out via both the radar working group reflector, but we are working really closely also with Charlie Cooksey at IFPI and with Richard Gooch. And we obviously, our DDEX members have their business partners in direct contact to those, and we're going to pull forces together to accommodate what we feel is the best option moving forward in 2025. Yeah.
So Rob from Beggars again. Just to let you know, we have two standards, and despite the examples that they are really easy to implement, there's probably a reason why not one company implemented both at the same time, because they were at it. It is a matter of resources. We understand that, everyone understands that. So there is a little bit of a hierarchy in these standards, and the standards, the reporting standard is for most of the companies the more important one. The rights claims conflict is secondary, but if you want to implement it in the different order, it's fine. It's just from the labels point of view, let me reiterate that the reporting one is the most important.